So I was always very curious. At school, science was probably my favorite subject.
Okay.
Dare I say my best subject. After school, I then joined the Royal Air Force in the UK.
Okay.
And I did that because I was interested in fighter jets. I guess from a Malaysian perspective, anybody who lives in Miri would probably feel the same pull, I guess.
Yes,
So-
yes, I'm sure. Okay, so this was in refinery or in the platform?
This was on a platform offshore, yeah.
How do you maintain on the Wi-Fi? You need some sort of connections, right? Hello everyone, welcome to my episode 6 of the Innovators Minutes. Today I have a very special guest from Scotland, Mr Stuart, who's also the Director of Axora. He's an oil and gas innovation expert, whereby he will be sharing about his experiences developing new products along his service period in all these giant companies, especially in Shell and BP, and also he's been sharing about his experience in innovating a product successfully. So what particularly does Axora does is that you just need to have one feasible and tangible idea, and the rest it's really about Axora developing the prototype, running the testing, and commercializing successfully in the market. So I bet this podcast will be very incredible and very knowledgeable section for those innovators out there. So join and hear me on this podcast. Hi Stuart. Morning.
Hi,
Morning to you.
Yeah, how's it going? Evening for you. How's it going?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. So it's public holiday here, so it's great for me. So
Right now.
after this recording, you have something on? You're gonna start with your work?
Yeah, I've got a full day's work ahead of me. Yes, so number of customers and clients that I need to speak to around their current innovation digitalization program. So I look forward to it.
Oh, okay. So give me a little introduction about yourself and how did your interest in innovation grew, and especially in oil and gas industry. So let's hear a bit from you.
Yeah, sure. So I from Newcastle upon Tyne in England.
Okay.
So when I was a child, I lived not far away from what used to be the old shipyards. But when I was growing up, those yards were full of oil and gas rigs.
Wow.
So I used to walk to school and I'd see all these shiny oil and gas rigs being built more or less on my doorstep. Also,
Wow.
a member of my family was a draftsman, and he actually helped design a lot of the oil and gas rigs that were going through the yards. So I always had a connection to that. But I guess from a STEM perspective, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics perspective, it was the space shuttle program. So when I was a child, I'm sure my age now. So when I was a child, the space shuttle program was just getting going. It was a big deal, and watching the space shuttle taking off from Cape Canaveral on TV, I used to think, how do they do it? How can they possibly do that? How can they take a vehicle into space and bring it back? So I was always very curious. At school, science was probably my favorite subject.
Okay.
Dare I say my best subject?
Yeah.
So I learned quickly at a young age that if I was super interested in something, you can become quite good at it. So I had to force myself with mathematics, but we got there. So I was really super keen in science, mathematics, engineering. I also had my grandfather was an engineer, and he used to do crazy inventions and contraptions in his shed, mostly out of wood, believe it or not, out the back. Wow. So I used to get involved in that. And so I guess from a young age, it was a feeding ground as a child is. How do things work? Why do they work? And how can I make them better? I guess was the last piece that I added as I started to mature into adulthood. After school, I then joined the Royal Air Force in the UK.
Okay.
And I did that because I was interested in fighter jets. So I was really interested in aviation and fighter jets. So I worked on fighter jets, and I really enjoyed it. Obviously did my bachelor's degree in engineering technology. Really enjoyed working on fighter jets. Went all over the world, including Malaysia.
Wow.
So I traveled the world fixing and working with fighter jets and the technology. And interesting because the technology back then was so advanced that some of that technology you see now in modern cars. So that shows how far ahead the military was with its innovation and with its technology. So I guess I was exposed then. I really enjoyed it. But going back to the energy stroke oil and gas industry, I always had that in mind that I was going to enter that industry. I always wanted to enter that industry. Friends of mine had. Obviously, I had relatives who were in the industry. And growing up so close to it was a huge pull. I guess from a Malaysian perspective, anybody who lives in Miri would probably feel the same pull, I guess.
Yes,
So,
yes, I'm sure.
yeah, so I then start to explore how I could get into the industry, and I wanted to leave the Air Force to join the oil and gas industry. So I honestly, it sounds simple, but what I actually did was I printed off my CV and I sent it to all of the big oil and gas companies in Aberdeen in the UK. That's where they're all based.
Okay.
And as naively as that, and believe it or not, Shell actually wrote back to me, and Shell said, read your CV, really interested. Would you come and do an assessment day on a certain day in the future? And obviously I went, did the assessment day, did okay, obviously, because they offered me a role, and I joined Shell. And I joined Shell as a trainee operations engineer.
Okay.
They then quickly sponsored me to do my master's in petroleum engineering out of Australia in Curtin. So I went and did that. I then became a petroleum engineer. And then throughout my career, starting off offshore, I did many roles: operations superintendent, offshore installation manager. I then came onshore, maintenance manager, integrity manager, asset manager, operations manager, not just in the UK. I was also in Malaysia. I was also in the Middle East, and I worked in Canada as well. I then left Shell and did the heinous crime of going to BP. So BP asked me to join them because one of my roles at Shell, I got highly involved in innovation. I bear in mind, I had my past of working on fighter jets with cutting edge technology and also robust maintenance systems. Because if it goes wrong at 1,000 miles an hour and 30,000 foot in the air, it goes really wrong. So you have to have robust maintenance strategies, maintenance delivery, and the technology that you have to use has to be fit for purpose, proven. Whereas when I switched into the oil and gas industry, and I'm sure anybody who works in the oil and gas industry won't mind me saying this, it is not, or it hasn't been always known for being super forward with its innovation. Don't get me wrong, we drill holes to ridiculous depths in the earth, and we pull out highly flammable and explosive material in a safe manner. That takes innovation and engineering, and I'm not doubting or knocking that in any shape. But the scale of innovation carried out by the likes of aviation or technology is worlds apart from the levels of innovation that in the past oil and gas was exposed to. That is changing, and I'll talk about that. So when I first went into the oil and gas industry, I looked around. The more years I spent in there, I thought we can make a big difference here by bringing in innovation in 3 key areas, really. Safety, we can improve safety, improve efficiency, and absolutely sustainability. And I'll talk more about sustainability because that's where I'm moving in my professional career now. So through that, I got a role in UK Southern North Sea of maintenance manager. And what I did was modernize the process with the team. We modernized the ERP system we were using. We modernized how the management and stock of spare parts and inventory was done. We modernized how people's competence was monitored and managed.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, we really improved the maintenance delivery of the Southern North Sea, where it became one of the best, I guess, maintenance units globally within the business, which was something that the team and I were really proud of. Through that, an ex-colleague had similar problems at BP. So he asked me to join BP. And I jumped across into BP and became their head of ops and maintenance for a number of their old large aging infrastructure and assets. Really enjoyed that role, very similar to my role at Shell. Again, huge modernizing through the ERP system and the CMS system they were using, and modernizing of the technology that the teams were using on the ground. One of the things I did there was my first exposure to artificial intelligence. So yeah. we had an issue, a safety issue, and we had the regulator in the UK, the health and safety executive, wanted us to deal with it, quite rightly. And one of the things we realized around this issue was we had so much data in our CMS system that as a maintenance organization, we couldn't see the woods for the trees. I'm sure you know that saying. So we were drowning in data. And like anything, and I see this a lot in my current role, it's fine having data, but you have to know what to do with it. You have to know how to organize it, and you have to know what's valuable data and what's not valuable data. So we started a project of looking at the data streams that we were receiving, how accurate they were, and what we could do with them. And what we developed was an AI program, a very early version of an AI program that would tell us, by looking at failure rates of equipment, what the likelihood was of an incident taking place on that equipment. Okay. So in real simple terms, imagine you had 10 indicators on a pump, and that could be pressure, volume, temperature, rotational speed, etc. Now, looking at failure rates and using statistics and basic failure statistics in formulae, you can work out roughly when that piece of equipment is going to fail.
Okay, so this was in refinery or in the platform?
This was on a platform offshore, yeah.
How do you maintain on the Wi-Fi? You need some sort of connections, right?
No, so you do. So it was connected to the DCS system. So they were hardwired.
DCS systems.
Yeah, so it was DCS systems. So they were hardwired in. Obviously, moving forward now, we're now 15 years in the future now, and a lot of it's through IoT, which is really cool. Okay. So what we did is we wrote a predictive maintenance formula, which is what most predictive maintenance systems have got now. And we worked with a company in Sweden, and we applied a very basic program to it. And what the program would do, it was a RAG system, so red, amber, green, and it would tell you to a level of accuracy when that piece of equipment was going to fail, which was light years away from what had happened previously. It was a case of a machine would be running and then it would fail, and we do root cause analysis, and we find out it was this bearing. We changed the bearing, and then 2 years later it would fail again because it's the same bearing. So what it gave us foresight of when a piece of equipment was going to fail. But from a safety perspective, it gave us foresight of when something potentially catastrophic was going to fail.
So that was my preventive maintenance?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so it was a preventive maintenance artificial intelligence system, really. So it worked really well. It won a number of awards. And
you have any commercial name for this? Like, so that, if people want to Google it out, and then it's easy for them to find it out.
Not really. No, so it's a BP product. So BP use it within BP. So I know they haven't sold it externally, so I don't know what they call it. I know what we called it at the time, but it's probably changed a lot over the last 15 years. It's probably a completely different product to what we developed. What we developed ultimately, if we go into innovation cycles, was probably a beta product that went through a pilot stage. Maybe even.
How about Shell? Shell do have this similar product as well?
Yeah, well, Shell do have predictive maintenance products, but they tend to, in my time there, they tend to go and buy them from specific maintenance providers, and that's the way the industry's gone, really, because you've got, I'll name a few. So you've got Predix. So Predix is a really good product that's out there that I'm aware of. There's another one called Sensei. So Sensei is a predictive maintenance product that's out there. Razor Labs out of Israel. They've got a really good predictive maintenance model that you can apply to your system. So they're out there, particularly now with Python programming and apps. It's a lot easier now than it was 15 years ago. I think back 15 years ago, it looked like you had to buy a big enterprise program and apply it to your Maximo or apply it to your SAP system. Those days are gone. You don't need to do that. You can actually get an app-driven preventive maintenance program that you can apply to one piece of machinery, or you can scale it up and apply it to a number of pieces of machinery. There's quite a cool company in Aberdeen in Scotland actually called OPEX that maybe your listeners want to check out. They've got some really good predictive maintenance tools that they apply within the oil and gas industry. So that was what I did at BP. That was really good. I then left BP and I went to work for Amec Foster Wheeler, which is now no more. They were bought out by Wood. So that was a global director role in, again, operations and maintenance, but it was on the service side. And the reason I did that, a lot of people question me why I did that. So I did that because I felt as if I was very operator focused, and I was viewing the oil and gas industry just from the operator's perspective. And I wanted to expand my vision, particularly around innovation, to see it from both sides of the story, really. That was a pretty cool role. I did that for a number of years. And that role there is very similar to what I do now. I did a lot of firefighting on behalf of operators. So I would go into their plants or their assets offshore, have a good understanding of what was going wrong, particularly from a contract delivery, and what innovation we could do. Now, innovation is a big word, right? So I view innovation as it can be hardware, software, it can be the people, it can be the culture, it can be the processes, it can be the procedures. So when I go in with my team, we look at everything and what can we innovate to make this better from a safety, efficiency, or a sustainability perspective. So I did that for a number of years with a team. And again, we produced some pretty cool stuff. So I had a R&D team, and we developed, working with a number of global players, we developed an automated program that can look at your decommissioning costs. So if your listeners go and look on a website called Rider Hunt International, we developed a product with them that looks at your decommissioning costs in the future. And all you do is you place in a few numbers, so the tonnage of your equipment, where it's based, and it will actually spit out, based on global normalization data, it will spit out how much it would cost to decommission that piece of equipment using different methodologies. Now, prior to this program, that would take around a month for a number of experts to sit there and go through Excel spreadsheets and work it all out and tap into market data. With that program that we developed, it was done within hours, literally hours. So that was a game changer. So that was something that we developed. We also developed a program called MIMS, which was a maintenance system, which was so basically your machinery tells you when it needs spare parts. So it understands, again, it came from the aviation industry. It's a well-known thing in the aviation industry. So piece of machinery could be running along, its filter is starting to get low, it needs its air filter changed, the diff across it's starting to increase. What it does, it contacts the logistics module within the ERP system, says, I need a new air filter. It goes, oh, I haven't got any. We've got none on site, I better order some. The system then orders them, they get delivered. And if the system works correctly, it gets delivered in time for when the maintenance routine is actually due to be delivered.
That's interesting.
So that was good. And the other thing that was developed was something called track and trace, which again, when I look back now, so I'm talking, where are we now? So I'm talking nearly 10 years ago now. So when I look back now, you could actually apply blockchain to this. So basically it's a barcode on a piece of equipment, and it's like everything that gets delivered to your home now, on your phone, you can track exactly where your parcel is on its journey. Well, back then, that wasn't around. It particularly wasn't around for large pieces of equipment in the oil and gas industry. But we brought it in, we developed it with a number of global logistics companies. We brought it in, and we brought it into the oil and gas industry. Whereas now, one of the things I'm working on now is through blockchain, you could have a piece of equipment built in China, and you can track back where that metal's come from through blockchain. You can then track the final product all the way to the final destination where it goes offshore to build an asset or whatever it's used for. So again, it's interesting from my perspective, looking how technology and innovation is constantly moving forward, and it seems incremental, which it actually is. But when you look back through time, there's huge jumps where you can say a piece of equipment or a program does a certain thing, and then somebody goes, well, this is new over here. What if I apply this new technology to this old, in inverted commas, because it's 10 years old technology, and then voila, you've got something brand new that you can then sell to the market. So that's pretty cool. So I did that, and then I then moved on to National Grid, where I was head of gas terminals for the UK. I did that for a number of reasons, and one of the main reasons again was innovation, was around modernizing. The manager who was there at the time was very progressive, moving a forward thinker, wanted to take their assets forward. They required some rejuvenation. Culturally, they needed to move forward, and from a technology perspective, new technology needed to be deployed. So I did that, which was a really good job. And then through that, I became head of UK innovation for the gas transmission business. Wow. And that was all about looking outwards to solve inward issues. So throughout the UK network, which is quite old now, it's been in place since the 1960s, there's problems with it. But rather than fix the problems the old way, let's fix them a new way. So working with the teams on the ground, what are their problems, understanding their problems, then looking at industry, particularly academia and small SMEs, or even entrepreneurs where there's 2 or 3 people in a startup, looking at what technology they've developed. Does it need developing? Can we support them financially, or can we support them from a technical perspective? Developing those technologies and then bringing them into National Grid to resolve issues. So that was a good role, very busy role all over the place. And then after that, I ended up at Axora. So Axora recruited me by BCG based on the history that I've just discussed. So what I'm involved in now is a number of different strands. So one of the first things that we do is we will be hired by global organizations who are looking to digitalize or modernize their systems of work. So we will go in as a team, which has been very difficult during COVID, but we will go in as a team and on the ground look at what is the problem they're trying to resolve. Is it an internal problem? Is it a problem external of how getting their products to their customers, or is it a hybrid of both? Once we understand what the problem is, we will then look at the market to see if there's any innovation that is plug and play. 9 times out of 10, there's not. There's always some sort of rework is required, or modernization is required, or even one of the other things that we do is we daisy chain technologies together to get a final product. We will do that with them, or they'll need to develop a new product, which again, we will work with them to develop a new product. So that's one of the things that we do. Another thing that we do is we take latent technology from big organizations. So let's say a large global oil and gas company has developed a piece of technology for improving the accuracy of drilling in a reservoir. Now, they've developed that technology internally. They might have developed it with a global service company. Mm-hmm. Now, what normally happens in the past is, and I've seen this in my time as an operator, and I've still got colleagues who still work in operators, and I know it still happens, is rather than an oil and gas company isn't geared up to manage the IP, isn't geared up to do the marketing or the sales or the after-sales service. They're about producing their own assets as safe as possible and getting their products to market. So when they develop a new product that is, let's say, is in pilot stage and requires further iterations of design or engineering, or requires even more investment to get it to a product that you could sell on the global market, that becomes I guess, a distraction within an oil and gas company. And 9 times out of 10, or even 9 times out of 100, they'll then pass off the IP to whoever their partners are, such as a global service company. They'll then develop the product, and then they'll rebadge it and sell it globally. And the oil and gas company has lost out on revenue. We step into that process a little bit. And what we do is we work with global oil and gas companies who've developed a product, but it's not ready to go to market yet. It's not fully productized. And let's say they haven't got high levels of reliability data. It's just at pilot stage, or even at prototype stage. We will then take that product. If we think, we will do an assessment on it, working with our own business partners. We'll do an assessment to get a good understanding of, is this a product that the market wants?
What kind of assessment, if you don't mind sharing? Like, what kind of assessments do you do?
Yeah, so it's quite a long process. So we have a number of different parameters. So we will look at, is this product already on the market, or is there products that are maybe 2 or 3 degrees away from this product? If the answer is yes, we then look at what's the market concentration and what's the market share that is potentially up for grabs. Because what we don't want to do is spend money and expend time on a product that when we bring it to market, there's no space for it, because the market's saturated by successful products already. So we look at that. We look at the economics of the market. We look at where would it sell, and we also look at what price point potentially would it sell at. So once we understand that, we look at the potential profit. Once we understand the profit, we then got a good idea of how much potential we could spend on developing this product.
But it's not only oil and gas, right? You have like across different industries as well?
Yeah, so we cover metals and mining as well. So we cover oil and gas right from downstream right through the upstream, and we cover exactly the same vertical within extent of a vertical, within metals and mining as well. But what that allows us to do as well, it allows us to cross-pollinate. So we might have a product that was developed in metals and mining, say, but there's no space for that product because of the successful, I guess, competitors that are out there. But then we look at it and we modify it, and then we sell it within oil and gas because it's got a job to do there. So we have that ability to cross-pollinate as well. So we look at the economics. Once we've looked at the economics, and there's a number of different things we look at, we then look at, okay, we can make this economically viable if we spend X amount of cash. But also what we do is, what do we need to do technically to get it to the level that it is expected within the industry? So we'll do a technical examination of the product. That then gives us a good idea of what development is required. That'll give us an idea of how much time, and that'll tell us how much money. Once we understand the money, we then look back at the economic data to say, right, it's going to cost us, let's say, $1 million to develop, but we think the market is worth $1 million a month. It's a no-brainer, right? But if the market's $1,000 a month, and it's going to cost us $1 million to develop, then it's not going to pass the go no go gate. So we would go back to the customer and say, we don't think there's a market for this, unfortunately, so we're not going to develop this any further. Fortunately, that tends not to happen, because we tend to find some really nice niche products that have been developed in-house that offers the opportunity for us to develop them. So what we do then is we technically develop them, we spend the money, we get them up to industrial standard. We run a number of pilots globally to make sure that the product does what we think that it can do. Once we've got that data back and it's successful, we will then agree with the original IP owner on the transfer of the IP. And what we also agree is the contractual royalty piece. So what does that mean for the large industrial oil and gas company? So what it means is, in the old days, they would give away their product that would be further developed by somebody who would then sell it, but they would receive no income. By working with Axora, we work with them, we develop the product at our cost, but we agree a deal that for in propriety, that they always get a royalty bonus payment every time we sell the product. So although we're selling it as Axora, the original designer, let's say version 1, even we might be at version 1000, they would still receive royalties for that. So that's how.
So you do on the marketing and the branding as well of the product?
We do everything. Really good question. So yeah, so once we get the product, once we've agreed the contract with the large industrial company, we develop the product, we pilot it, we tested it, we're comfortable with the reliability of the product, comfortable with the performance of the product, we will then internally market it. So we will market it on a global scale, and people like me will do a number of interviews with people like you and talk about the product. We will test it, we will prove it, and we also deliver the after service service as well, so the ASA. So
That's just a complete process.
It's a turnkey process, yes. So we do everything from cradle to grave with the product. But
Okay, so let's say the ideas is given by this particular company. You find it after you do a little bit of market research and everything, right? You find it like it's not feasible or it's not tangible to be in the market. So you will actually fine tune the ideas so that it looks more feasible and everything. So your team will do that, fine tune the ideas. Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we don't give up easy. So we if we think the idea promise, but maybe on its own it doesn't, what we'll do is we'll look, well, okay, I'll give you a real simple example. So I've got a pen, company's designed a pen, but it keeps drying out. What we will do is we'll go, right, this product's got potential. Why don't we daisy chain it with something else and we put a cap on the top? So we get a product from somewhere else, or we'll design it ourselves, and then we put the cap on, and then there you've got a pen then where the ink doesn't dry out, and then we'll sell that to market. Real simple analogy of what we do.
So do you like commit to any typical time frame for any particular products that you're working on? Let's say I'm coming out with a product to you and then I see it out. What is the typical time frame you will commit?
The keyword's complexity.
Okay.
How complex is the product? And not that complexity is not at the front end also, it's at the back end. So for example, we might develop a SaaS solution. That SaaS solution, we can apply a number of programmers to that solution, but we can deploy it remotely. So I could be sitting in my bedroom here at home, and I could deploy a SaaS solution to an oil and gas company in Australia. So it's not complex to deploy, it's not complex to develop. So the time frame would be quite small for us to get that from beta stage all the way through prototype, pilot to full deployment. That would happen quite quick, I would surmise. But if we've got a hardware product, which we have, let's say we've got transducers that are measuring corrosion on pipework.
Okay.
So we have to develop the hardware. So we have to get hardware partners. So we've got to manufacture the product. We've then got to test it. We've got to prove it, and we've got to prove it to destruction on a number of occasions. So we get high reliability data. So we understand how long the equipment can work and how accurate that equipment works over that reliability curve. Once we've got that data and we're comfortable and we're ready to sell to market, we've got to deploy it. So to deploy transducers, to say, let's use the same analogy, Australia, we would have to send a team offshore Australia. They would have to work with the operational team, who would probably have to remove lagging from pipework, make sure the pipework was isolated, depressurized. Then they would apply the technology. Then they would have to commission the technology. Then they would have to prove the technology was working. Then the lagging would have to be reapplied. And then over a certain time period, we would have to check in with the customer to make sure the data we're receiving is to the level of quality that we want. So the complexity from A to B is a lot different. So a program like that, even if it was a small pilot, potentially could be a lot longer than a SaaS solution. That doesn't mean that we only focus on SaaS solutions. We don't. We focus on a broad range of products, ultimately, that advances our customer's business position. But to answer your question, it's all depends on complexity.
Okay. So what about the facilities? Like when you're talking about developing the prototype and testing the equipment and the ideas itself, so you have your own facilities, or you will use your client's facilities as well? Or you collaborate with some universities and all these sort of things?
Yeah, so it's a hybrid really. So we have manufacturer partners where again we've done our due diligence on them, or they've got a track record within the industry. And what we do is they will develop, we will apply the design, and they will develop the design and build the product on our behalf, test it, and then we take that product, do our own testing, and then deploy it wherever the test facility is going to be. Also, we work with a number of innovation labs. So I'm sure you're aware, most oil and gas companies have got pop-up innovation labs now. So we work a lot with them. But again, ultimately, the product will become Axora. We might develop it conjunctly with an oil and gas company, but that product will become an Axora product through our productization program. So again, it's through contractual. But what's super exciting about being involved in innovation space is everybody gets excited about it, right? If you've got a product that's looking really good and it's going to change the world, and it's in a lab and you're working in a lab in Milan, everybody wants to be in the lab and work with that product. Everybody wants to go offshore and test it and get it proven to work.
Yes.
So what I like about it is the whole legal contractual piece during the development seems to be forgotten. Everybody forgets about that, and it's all about developing the product. You come back to that once you get to the sales piece.
Okay.
That's why it's important that you have the contracts correct up front.
So what I understood that you are doing the entire innovation process. So do you mind sharing in a very layman term, like what is the first step up to commercialization? What it's really required in order to commercialize a product, from the idea generation up to commercialization? Just put it like in one sentence kind of thing.
Okay, so it's changing mindset. So
Okay.
I'd say you have to go at the product creation process is nothing's off the table. No matter how crazy the idea is, write it down and explore it. So
Okay.
that's always the starting point. Nothing is too crazy. For example, who thought we could send people to the moon? Who thought about the internet? So nothing is ever too crazy. So that's your starting point. Unfortunately, what tends to happen then is you end up going down a narrow tunnel to the point where you have to sell something commercially. And the example I always give, and I'm sure your listeners will go and review that. So there was a guy in the UK called Sir Clive Sinclair, who brought computers to the masses in the early 80s. Now, Sir Clive developed something called the Sinclair C5, which was one of the first battery-powered on-road automobiles in the early 80s. And it was a huge flop, and it almost made him bankrupt, and it was a joke at the time. However, it was the right product at the wrong time, because what is the automobile industry doing now? They're developing products that are battery driven. So you could say Sir Clive was well ahead of his game. And that's what innovators have to always be aware of, is your product viable commercially? Yes or no. And that is nearly always a binary answer, yes or no. Now, what I would also say is don't be downhearted if it's not, because it might be the right product at the wrong time.
Okay.
So commercializing is a tough process. You have to look at, what is my product? What does it do? Who's already doing it? How competitive is the landscape? What price I can produce it for, which means what price can I sell it for? And what price are my competitors selling at? And if you can pass those litmus tests, then you've got a product you can take to market.
Interesting. So you have your own steps, right? In your company, particularly like how you get it done.
Yeah.
So especially, I'm always very interested to know about market research, right? So how thorough do you cover your market research? Do you only do in oil and gas industry, or do you cover every other industries? And how depth do you go to your market research?
So it's a good question. So market research goes deep. So it is primarily focused on the energy industry, not oil and gas. So energy, so covers renewables, solar, DAX, BECS, all different technologies that are competing in the sustainability space. Really, it's energy stroke sustainability, I guess. So we do the classics. So we do quantitative research and qualitative research. So we will send out surveys to industry leaders, and that is across industrials, SMEs, academia, students, and even the public.
Wow.
We will send out surveys asking them a number of questions around innovation, products, particularly if it's around one product or one area. Let's say safety. So there'll be like 30 questions all around safety and technology, and what technology you can do for safety, and what have you seen, and what have you seen elsewhere that works, that oil and gas could learn from. So we'll send out those surveys, and we tend to get a pretty high response rate. What else we do is we'll do qualitative research, where we'll interview known players within the industry. So So like so we'll interview a safety expert, but that safety expert might cover not just oil and gas, might cover chemicals, might cover mining, the steel industry, the construction industry. And again, we'll have an hour-long conversation with that person all around innovation, all around the industry, where the gaps are, what do you think would close the gaps? How would you close the gaps? Have you seen any technology? I'll give you an example. So we had a really good conversation around, we've got a number of mining customers who are struggling with Wi-Fi under the ground. But when you speak to people who travel on the underground in London, they can use Wi-Fi, right?
Yes.
So, and I've traveled on many undergrounds around the world where I've got Wi-Fi. So that you get Wi-Fi underground on a train, surely you can get Wi-Fi underground in a mine. So where's the technology gap? Why has the technology gap not been closed? Who can close that gap? Have you met anybody who can close that gap? And then we gather all this information and data, and we then synthesize it, and it produces we then produce a number of documents that give us the hot trends in the industry. That could be culturally, it can be technology, it can be positive trends, negative trends. And then from that data set, we produce a report. Now we give that report to our business partners. We give that report to people who interact with our platform, our community platform. And we also take that data to ensure that where we're looking or how we're managing innovation matches into the trends that are happening globally within these communities.
Okay, interesting. Another question that just struck my mind, I wanted to ask you, let's say when you're developing a prototype, right? How soon you should actually already acknowledge this particular product in the market? Will you wait until you go through like alpha test, beta test, and then you get a certain amount of tests get approved, or you will do in parallel? You will start promoting in the market while you are developing in certain stage, or you will finish all the tests and then only you bring into the market? Like at what stage you actually try to introduce the product in the market?
So it's a good question. Depends who your market audience is. Depends how large your market is. But for me personally, how I manage the process is I take a leaf out of Steve Jobs' book, really. And
okay.
Ask yourself the question, how many products do Apple launch that fail or have poor reliability or poor product reviews? And the answer is pretty low, right?
Yes.
And that's because they ensure that when they release a product to the market, it is ready for the market. It's got high, yeah. And I'm in the same place, particularly when you're operating in hazardous industries such as oil and gas. And if I look at both sides of that conversation, so if I go back to my old operator days, when somebody was trying to deploy something on one of my assets or an asset that I was working on, the first question I asked them is, where's this being deployed? And then the next question is, how reliable was it? Because what I don't want is an incident taking place in a hydrocarbon environment. So that's operator view, which is quite correct. The innovator view should be, my reputation is based on the products that I produce.
Okay.
Do I want my reputation to be tarnished by being too quick to market with something that it fails? Or do I want my reputation, such as Apple's reputation, that when I bring something to market, people can trust it because they know it's been extensively tested, it's proven, and it delivers what it says it can deliver?
Okay.
What I do see within innovation circles is the classic. I don't know if you've heard of summit fever. So summit fever is a mountain climbing term, and it unfortunately, if you look at the largest mountains in the world, such as Everest or K2, most deaths occur at the top. And the reason they occur at the top is because the climbers, and I've done a bit of climbing, a little bit of climbing. So the climbers, when they get there, are so desperate to get to the top because that's what they've trained for years, that regardless of the environment they're in, the weather could be deteriorating, they could be highly fatigued and they need a night's sleep, or they need to refuel, they carry on going and they don't make it. That's known as summit fever. I see that within innovation circles as well, where you as I spoke about earlier, you've got a product and everybody's super stoked and excited about this product and it's going to change the world and we've got to get it out there as quick as we can. And in reality, you need to step back and go, am I suffering from summit fever here? Do we need to take time out, make sure the product's correct? Is the programming correct? Is the hardware correct? Is it reliable? And once you're really comfortable and you've done market testing and you've had customer testing and you've taken the feedback on board and you've made changes, or once you're comfortable and you're in that space, then release to market, because then you're relying on your marketing team and you're relying on your sales team and you're not relying on hoping that the product isn't going to fail.
Okay, so you can say that among this innovation process, right? So a prototype and testing is the longest piece, or you would say everything has their own portion of.
It comes back to complexity again.
Okay.
It depends on what the product is. For example, if you're doing a SaaS solution that you can run on 30 machines for 30 days and just let it run to see what its reliability rate is, that's fine. But if you've got hardware that you need to put into an oil and gas environment, then that's going to take time, right? So if I go back to the corrosion transducers again, you're not going to know how reliable those corrosion transducers are within 12-month period. That's going to take 3 years before you get a real good, solid data stream that tells you how reliable they were and how accurate they were. So you can speed that process up in a lab, which is your prototype stage, by inducing high corrosion rates on a piece of steel, for example. But ultimately, you need to see how it performs in real environments. And those environments you're going to have to alter, right? Because testing corrosion equipment in Malaysia, humid environment, compared to testing it in offshore Scotland, is completely different, right? And again, you have to understand that in your product before you can truly go to market and say, this is how it's going to perform. So again, it comes back to complexity.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I mean, it's so interesting to see what Axora is doing and what you are doing and your contribution. And I can see that your knowledge, oh my God, your experience, it's really from the way that you're explaining, right? From every process about your experience in, being in Air Force, and now you're an innovation director. That's like a huge milestone, and that's really very, very interesting. I was like, at one point I was very speechless. I was like, wow, this is so interesting. I mean, coming from your background, your childhood up to your Air Force, and then BP, Shell, all this experience that we're sharing, it's very incredible. It's really a very good lesson for the listeners out there. I'm sure they can learn a lot, and especially what Axora is doing. It's something that I think a lot of innovation companies should learn from what you are doing. And I think a lot of developers, especially new product developers, are struggling on the processes itself. I mean, everyone has the idea. Anyone can come up with the ideas, right? But for you to put that idea into feasible and to commercialize it, that's another level of process. I think not everyone might already tackle those issues. But I think Axora is doing a very good job. And I see the way when you're explaining, you go very in detail, very in depth, like your market research, your prototype. It's so in detail. So thank you so much for today. Lots of sharing. I think I personally gain a lot of things because being a researcher myself, I think I need to know all this, like what you were saying, the reliability, the complexity, and the entire process itself. You got to do it very thoroughly end of the day, because like what you were saying, you are dealing with something with hydrocarbon environment. You wouldn't want to make any mistake. And like what you said, like I'm producing a product, I wouldn't want to tarnish my name end of the day, right? Because the market is there. You need to be someone in the market, and people has to like. Apple is a very good example. You wouldn't even think twice to buy Apple product because they're very established, and you know that they're very ready and they have gone through all these testings and everything. So you have to have that kind of acknowledgement in the market. So thank you so much for your sharing today. I would really love to have you in another section because it's so much that I can learn from you. I'm sure the listeners are like, they really can get a lot from you from today's section. So we will keep up some other questions in other sections maybe, but this is like what you have today. It's like really a lot. So thank you so much for your time today, Stuart. It's like really very, I really appreciate for the time in your sharing section.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.